My Father's Work is an app-assisted mad science-themed board game. Hi, it's Dr. Ryan from Knights Around a Table. Let's find the fun. But before we begin, I should say that I did something with this game that I have never done for any other board game I've played in my life. Stay tuned to find out what that is. Fun! The components. This is largely why you're buying this board game. The components are mad scientist kiss beautiful. You've got metal coins. You've got wooden components that are silk screened with images on them. You've got high quality cards and tokens. You've got little glass bottles with corks in them to represent potions. The gears are metal. The animals are silk screened. And it's not just one thing that generically represents animal. You got a big pile of different animals. Everything looks beautiful from top to bottom. Functionally though, it's a little odd to me that these white pieces are kind of top heavy and any small nudge of the board makes them fall over. But that's okay, because that only happens with the white player pieces. Oh, well, they didn't make that mistake with 3 sets of player pieces. Okay, well, surely not all 4 sets of player pieces do this. Okay, off to a rocky start. Not fun, randomness. Now, you know me, I don't mind a little bit of randomness in my game. But not to this degree. The app seems to almost exist to mess with the players. So it'll say something like, do you like purple or do you like blue? Blue is associated with the wind. Purple is associated with sofas. So like, I don't know, I guess I like sofas? And then the app will be like, ha ha ha, gain 3 points. And then like you'll play a few rounds and the app will be like, attention, everybody who said they like sofas like a few turns back gets deprived 1 worker for the rest of the game. Or that kind of nonsense. You can't predict what the app is going to do to you as a player, and like in not a good way, not in like a delightful surprise kind of way. More in like, I might as well not be playing kind of way. It reminds me very clearly of an experience I had playing the wretched Mario Party board game series. It's a digital board game that you can play on Nintendo platforms. I think we played for about 3 hours, which is too long for that kind of thing, with like a roll to move kind of thing. I was swamping everybody in points. There was no hope of catching up. I was in the last stretch. I just needed to go a few more places until I reached the finish line. And then some mushroom-headed thing pops out from behind a rock and says, "Hey, trade points with the player in last place." And then vanishes in a puff of stars or some nonsense. And there, like, all my effort in the game was completely negated. Everything good that I did, the game kind of spat on. And it feels like that's the case with My Father's Work. You can't plan for anything because you don't know if, like, at any moment, the app could just say, well, guess what? Because you placed your scientist figure on the wrong spot, 4 rounds ago, you got to give up 4 gold. If your whole strategy revolved around gold, well, tough nuts to be you, I guess. I believe there's such a thing as too random. And this is it. I'm going to tell you how to play My Father's Work by way of telling you how to play Splendor. Because truth be told, they're essentially the same game. In Splendor, you have a tableau of jewel cards that everybody wants to buy. You have 5 resources that are gems, and you spend those resources in order to buy the cards, put them out in front of you, and in buying the cards, you get discounts so that you can buy more expensive cards off the tableau. First person to get to X number of points wins the game. So in My Father's Work, instead of 5 resources that are gems, you get a handful of resources that are other things that are more thematic to mad science. Instead of the tableau being out on the table for everybody to buy from, you've got a deck. Each row in the tableau is split into level 1, 2, and 3 decks. You get cards from each level to kick off the game. Then you introduce a whole second tier of resources to goof around with. And anytime you fill the recipe on the card and you buy the experiment and put it out in front of you, it usually gives you a discount to create higher level experiments. But then we want to be able to sell something on Kickstarter, so we're going to have minis. So we need to justify that. So those minis are going to become pawns that you have to place somewhere. And if you're going to place them somewhere, then it's more of a worker placement game. What are we going to do? We'll have locations where you can place those minis in order to get resources to spend on the experiments that you want to build. And then depending on what happens in the app, we'll make the worker placement spots in a book, and then we can flip pages so that new locations can get added to that book. Then we'll add like a private board and a whole extra mechanic where there's tiles that you can spend money on to build, to put on your private board to get extra little legs up. And let's put some parameters around where you can place workers. Some of them you can place on your private board, some of them you can place on the main board, and then the app can mess around with that. So maybe it can give you penalties. So it's like people you were allowed to place on your main board, you're not allowed to place on the main board anymore, or vice versa, you can't place them on your private board. Sure, that's sounding pretty good. So it's like the game design kind of sounds like mad science. Oh, we'll mix a little bit of this, so I'll grab this from this game and mix it up. And a lot of games do that, but a lot of games do it effectively. Nothing blows up in your face. The problem with having all those experiment cards dealt face down to each individual player is that they sort of chain together. One card can lead into another, can lead into another. So you just might luck out and you get one card that when you build it, it gives you the prerequisites to build the next card, and when you build that one, it gives you the prerequisites to get the next card. If you're dealt your cards and there's no synergies between them, what you have to do is start placing workers in different spots of the map and trying to grab more cards so that you can fish through the deck to find those synergies. So just due to that random nature of the game, it could just like deliver a player a much easier path through the game or a much faster victory, and everybody else is sort of left in the lurch. Not an Addams Family reference. Fun! The replayability. Now, despite this being a narrative-based app, you might hear that and think, oh, it's like a one and done kind of thing. Well, no, there are 3 different modules. One tells a story about a war, one tells a story about paranoia, and one tells a story about disease coming to the town. You pick which module you want to play with off the top of the game, and then when you get to the end of the game, you unlock one of multiple different endings. I think there are 6 or 7 different endings for each of these modules. So what the app is doing is it's making sort of like a random call, I believe, to put you on a different path within the module that you choose. And all of the components that you pull out of those tuck boxes won't necessarily be used for the game that you're playing. So you might want to replay the Time of War scenario to find out what those tokens that you never put to use actually do in the game. I haven't played this game enough times to see if the app is smart enough to sort of stow an ending once you've unlocked it so that it doesn't randomly draw that same path for you the next time you go through that module. I hope it does. So on the subject of replayability, it's not always a good thing. Let me give you a little anecdote from when I was a very young game developer. I was working at YTV, which is like Canada's Nickelodeon channel. And I was making games for the website, and a lot of them were sponsored games. So Skippy Peanut Butter came to us and said, hey, we need a game to advertise Skippy Peanut Butter to children. Sure, I go off and I make that game. I really like adventure, story-based, sort of graphic adventure, point-and-clicky kind of stuff, with a lot of narrative-heavy elements to it. So I made sort of like a murder mystery game with no murder. An item was stolen, so it was a theft mystery game. I made it with a cast of characters. I think there were 10 or 12 different woodland creatures that you could meet in the forest as Skippy the Squirrel. And each time you played, it picked a different one of those 10 or 12 characters to be the murderer, the thief. And it was sort of cycle around all of the different clues that you had to follow so that you followed a different path depending on who the culprit was. So the point is, I spent a lot of work making sure that the game was really replayable. I mean, there were 12 different endings that you could see in this game. The thing that I didn't figure on, being a very young game developer, was that I had to make sure that the game was interesting once in order to justify multiple endings. Because if players don't enjoy the first experience through, it doesn't matter how replayable it is. 5 endings, 10 endings, 1,000 endings, it doesn't matter. If they didn't dig it the first time through, they're not going to go for endings 2 through N. So it's a design lesson that I took to heart very early in my career. Maybe it's a design lesson that these guys are still figuring out. Not fun. The app is buggy. Now I'm doing this review just about a week after they released the second version of the app. I haven't tried the new version of the app. I kind of don't care to be honest, because my experience with the original version of the app was so lackluster. Let me give you an example of a couple of ways the app kind of like completely messed up our game to the point where we didn't see a point in continuing. So in one game it said, turn to page 10 of the book, and the idea is that the map evolves with different worker placement spots with different pages that you turn to in reaction to the story that's being told in the game. So we turn to page 10 and it says something like, oh, if you place people on the storehouse, and we look at page 10 of the book and there's no location called the storehouse, for example. In another instance, the app likes to do things where you have to pass the phone that has the app on it to different players and they get to read something secretly that may or may not affect the outcome of the game. See my randomness point earlier. So it was very particular. So pass the thing to me, okay, and I'm going to read this blob of text. So it said my username at the top of this text window, and it gave me a big chunk of text that I was supposed to read. And then it said, like, pass the app on to the next player and hit the button. So I hit the button. Now the only thing that changed on the screen was that very small print username. The text, block of text was the same, and the choices at the bottom were the exact same. So when I hit, okay, go, I'm handing it to the next person, I didn't see anything change. So I thought it was still talking to me, and I'm like, oh, it didn't register my choice. So I hit the button again, and not knowing that I had decided for 2 people. So we proceeded, and then we thought, well, it's kind of weird that like player 2 didn't get the same choice that I did. And then thankfully the app has like a go back feature, which is a necessity with this kind of thing. So I hit go back and I looked at that choice again. I said, oh, that tiny, 4-point font changed, and it changed to your name. That's what happened. So I make a choice, you make a choice, and then something happens in the game. So we made the choices and we made the choices, and then we expected something to happen in the game. But the problem is, here's what the app is doing. It's taking you down a branching path, and it rolls the dice on which path that you're going to follow. So say you follow it, 2 or 3 steps ahead, and you do all the stuff and you change the map, and you're making all these adjustments, and then you think, wait, something weird's happening. A couple steps back, I got to go adjust. So when you back up to the head of the branch that you were at, and you make you correct that, or you reread or whatever, it doesn't know to send you along the path that it had originally sent you on, and it may roll the dice and send you careening off another completely random path. So you're not retracing your steps and going back down the branch that you were on. You could be sent somewhere completely different. That's a bug. In other cases, it did really weird stuff. So it's like, at one point it told us that, okay, absolutely everybody, this is important, everybody at the table has to place their workers on this certain worker placement spot on the map, or else there will be consequences. I'm like, oh, okay, we better do that then. So everybody at the table took that piece and then put it on that location, which to no benefit, by the way. They didn't gain resources or cards or anything like that. They just stuck it there. It's kind of like a wasted turn. So we thought, wow, it seems pretty important to the game that we do this. After we made that choice to play those pieces to that location, the app never asked us, hey, who played their pieces to that location? It never said anybody who didn't play those pieces to that location loses this, gains this. There's just no conclusion to that requirement in the app. It just went nowhere. I thought it was funny when Renegade Games says, okay, the board game's ready, but the app isn't, because it just took me back to my video game development days, and it affirmed for me that app development is a million times more difficult than board game development. Guys, you think making a board game is hard? Poosh, wait till you try to get cert on a video game platform. And usually, I don't really side with the people who are like, what? The board game is app assisted, 0, 0, 0. Just ornery like that and don't even give the thing a chance. In this case, the fears and complaints of all those people are brought to life. There's real cause to grumble about it here. Fun, the theme. Mad science, it's a winning theme. I don't feel like we get it in enough games, and I could do with it more in games. Because I think it's pretty cool, especially if you like gallows humor, if you like sort of like dark stuff, witty stuff, satirical stuff. I think there's a lot of play in that area with the mad science theme. And beyond the component quality, I do have to say it's the theme that really drew me to this game. I think there's something very compelling about it, and it was a good choice. Not fun, the theme. Okay, so you think you're going to get into like a mad scientist kind of thing, and it is a mad scientist kind of thing, okay, fine, but it tacks on certain other themes in those module boxes that are just a little bit too close to real life to make for, I believe, an enjoyable Friday night at the board game table. I remember shortly after the pandemic began, I sat down to watch this series on Amazon Prime called Utopia. And it was about a plague that was destroying the nation, killing a bunch of people. And I distinctly remember one moment where a character, stone-faced, looks into the camera and says, "This virus means the death of 20,000 Americans." And I was like sitting back on the couch eating popcorn like, "Nah, sweetie, that ain't nothing." So one of the modules in this game is called The Cost of Disease, and it's about a plague that infects people. And it's kind of like, yeah, pass. It's the reason I don't play Pandemic. Another real-life event that happened, of course, recently is that war broke out in Ukraine. One of the modules is a time of war. Once again, for some weird reason, I'm cool with the, mostly fictional stuff of reanimating corpses and doing weird unnatural things with the animals' bodies and electrifying frogs and making robots and time machines and all that kind of stuff. The real sci-fi stuff, I could just do without some of the more real-world corollaries. This is escapism for me. I want to escape, and the game kind of prevented me from doing that a little. With mad science as a theme, you can go along kind of like a seriousness spectrum. And I think the farther away we get from the source material, the less serious it becomes. That's why we got Frankenstein over here and maybe young Frankenstein over here. I think we kind of like mad scientists. I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but we like it to be more over here than over here, especially on a fun game night when you got people invited. So I'm not expecting the thing to go completely off the goofy deep end to something, you know, really kiddie like Dr. Eureka, blah, you're mixing test tubes with potions, blah. But I thought a piece of pop culture that straddles that line pretty brilliantly is Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. It's mad science, it's really funny, but it takes dips into seriousness. And ultimately it ends off on a really kind of like thoughtful, serious note. I would have loved for this game to have struck that kind of tone, but it doesn't. But there's a reason why Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog was written by an accomplished screenwriter, and this was written by somebody you've never heard of. Fun! The writing on the flavor text on the cards. Now these are just 1 or 2 line little things, and they're kind of creepy, darkly humorous gags about the kinds of experiments you're performing. Let me read you a couple. The telegraph machine. I found it to be a useful personal tool to relay knowledge of my infamous creations, and to send birthday greetings. Ha ha ha, okay, cute. Tensile joint analysis. Question. Could joint strength be improved by gluing gears into the hindquarters of the family pet? I mean, creepy, but kind of funny. Pressurized goggles. Study the effects of vacuum cylinders on eyeballs. I mean, when I first found out about the game, that was the kind of feel that I was hoping would be in there. So, good job, cards. Not fun. As humorous as the flavor text on the cards is, it's almost like a completely different person wrote the stuff in the app. The cards, the stuff is pithy. It's like one sentence, you get the gag out. It's funny, it's thematic, it's dark, it's wry. I love it. In the app, though, what you have is like pages and pages of stuff that's, I think, trying to set the mood, but the tone of it is like desperately dour and serious and heavy and straight-faced. And there are no, I mean, that I could see, there were no kind of like winking like, hey, we're all having fun. And yeah, mad science, you know, mad science. And I think some of the best humor comes about from the sort of like the giggling in church effect, when things are very, very serious, and then when funny things happen, they make it, you know, they amplify the funniness. But that wasn't the case here either. There wasn't anything really, there weren't attempts at jokes or levity anywhere. It was just like really overbearingly dark, I would say. And I mean, for me, not in an enjoyable way. I think the brevity and wit that was brought to bear on those cards would improve the game tremendously if it showed up in that app. Fun. Game trays. Now, Game Trays is a company that publishers can commission to create plastic inserts, vacuum-formed inserts for the boxes. And a year or more ago, when this game was on Kickstarter, Game Trays was a major selling point. Now, Game Trays seems to be in like every single game you get. It's almost like a requirement. If you make a game, it's got to have Game Trays in it, which, I mean, I'm on board for. But they're nice. They're nice in this game. I mean, the one tray that has all the cool components in it is kind of pill-shaped. It looks really cool. Everything fits really nice in it. It's not too much of a trouble to figure out which figurine goes into which slot in the tray that holds all the different mini pieces. Although it would be nice to have maybe the silhouette of the figurine stamped below all the cavities, so that it just makes it a little bit more easy. And if I'm being honest, there were a couple of cheats in this insert. So I mentioned the 3 different modules. Well, they're in 3 different cardboard tuck boxes. And when you open one of those tuck boxes, out just spills baggies and chits and tokens and pieces and cards, and there's no order to any of those. So it's a bit of a disparity to have everything so neatly organized in the rest of the box, and then things just kind of crammed into those flimsy cardboard tuck boxes. Also, I couldn't quite figure out how that top tray was supposed to work. There are indents in shapes for certain pieces, but I can never really figure out how I'm sort of supposed to put them all in there. So, I mean, overall, pretty decent job, but a couple missed opportunities, I think. Not fun, the story. Now, I'm putting quotes around it because what you get from this game, I don't think is a story. I think the author needs to be reminded that setting is not story. Now, let me tell you the story that the game tells in one of the modules, and like, I don't know, click away if you're worried about spoilers, but really it's not going to matter. So in the time of war scenario, it says 2 sides are at war. One is like rebel peasants and one is the aristocracy. Different points in the game, you have to swear your allegiance or throw your support between one side or the other. Eventually, in the branch that it sent us through, we started making contraptions to help the war effort. So one side, I'm not sure which, used, you know, our mechanized robots to fight in the war. One building got destroyed off the map. So it was like, oh, you can't get an extra coin now or something on your turn. That was the upshot. And by the end of the story, one side had won. I'm not too sure which, because the way that the writing was phrased was super generically so that they could reuse that passage whether either side won. So that was it. There was a war, you made stuff, and one side won. Story! So for a game that's been widely lauded for the story that it crafts, like, I mean, maybe I just have much higher standards for storytelling, but this doesn't do the trick. And then another distinction I think that the author was having trouble with, and I'd be interested to know whether it's just one author for this whole thing, but there's a difference between story and narration. Like, once upon a time there was a ramshackle house on a crooked hill. That's not story. That's setting, that's environment. And the app seems really like it's really important to the app to set that scene, to generate that mood for what's going to happen in the game. And like, unnecessarily, I think, it's mad science. Like, people who are into this game, I mean, it's not their first Frankenstein rodeo. They know what Frankenstein is. They know of Dracula, even if they haven't read it. You know, they've seen maybe movies based on the book, or they've seen movies based on the movies based on the book. Like, maybe you've seen Transylvania 6-5000, or maybe you've seen Dracula Dead and Loving It. You get the shtick. This is what I'm saying. You've seen Young Frankenstein. We have a shorthand for different pockets of pop culture, and mad science is one that we have shorthand for. So I just have to say to you, you know, like Victorian Gothic, and you're like, oh yeah, like Frankenstein and Dracula, yeah, that's it. And that's kind of what the app should do. It should be like, you know, like Frankenstein. But it doesn't need to drone on paragraph after paragraph after paragraph talking about how gray everything was and how the wind rustled the dry leaves in the trees and everything's rot and decay and blah, blah. Like, yeah, we get it. The moment you say mad science, Victorian, you know, somewhere in northern or northeastern Europe, we get it. We can picture it. You don't need to make us picture it. I like to contrast this with Mansions of Madness, which I recently played, which is based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And he is famous for like really florid purple prose that just kind of goes overboard. And they have a quote from H.P. Lovecraft right off the top of the game experience. And in that quote, he uses the word terraqueous, which, like, you probably never heard it before in your life, and you probably will never hear it again unless you read Lovecraft. But despite it being based on the works of Lovecraft and the writings of Lovecraft, it's not written like Lovecraft wrote it. It's written in pretty plain English. It uses the themes that Lovecraft uses. It evokes the same feelings that Lovecraft's writing tries to evoke, but it doesn't do it with the same unnecessarily obtuse language, if that makes sense. But what you have here with my father's work is the author seems like he's trying to write it in the style of Dracula or in the style of Frankenstein. And so you get him using these 10-cent words that, like, imagine playing this with your grandma or with a friend who's maybe not that strong of a reader, and the app throws at him a word like chimerical. And then your friend says something like chimerical. You're like, what are you talking about here? Give me that. And you read it and like, oh, you know, I think that's chimerical. And he's like, well, what the heck does that mean? And you gotta explain. Everybody feels bad about it. And it's just kind of embarrassing. Could have been done much more simply. Could have been done with a little bit more regard to the fact that there are real people at this table with varying degrees of comfortability reading stuff from an app. Just, I guess, more mind could have been paid to the user experience of that aspect of it. You know, the game promised voiceover, and it does have voiceover, but just like Mansions of Madness, it only has it in like maybe a couple of intro paragraphs, maybe off the top of every generation. So if you're hoping that the entire thing could be read to you, hope again. You're going to be struggling with words like chimerical for the next 3 hours. A couple more digs at the author because I'm not done yet. I question the tastefulness of having a curse word in your rulebook. I just think that this writing could have used a much more strident editor. I feel crappy for saying all this, honestly, because I'm an artist. I create things. I know how difficult it is to create things, so I don't like dumping on things that people put all their hard work and effort into. But when I create something, I also endeavor to make it worth people's money. And if I charge a certain amount for it, I'm doing my best to offer value for dollar. And I think at a much lower price point, maybe this game is a better fit for some people. Of course, they'd have to tone down a lot of those components to make it work. I don't know, but that seems like the point of the exercise. Take kind of a mediocre game, let kind of a mediocre writer wallow in that mediocrity and churn out reams and reams of text that nobody's going to want to read, and then bundle it up in a really churched up package. Put a big price tag on it and step forward profit. You might say, oh, Ryan, the story is really cool because as things happen in the app, it adds locations and it takes locations away on that main board where you're placing your workers. And I say to you, well, that's something like Charterstone did that years ago. And it wasn't interesting when Charterstone did it either. Charterstone would give you this big paragraph like, oh, the happy little baker had her basket full of loaves and she was trundling down the street and then she tripped and a loaf fell out of her basket, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're reading this story, this supposed story. Remember, there's a difference between story and narrative. So you're reading the story, narrative. And just the conclusion is that now this location on the map gets you 2 loaves of bread instead of 1. And so all that blah, 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 all that yammer that the app made you read on the way to that conclusion was just, you know, it was pointless crap. It was filler. It was just wasting your time. I don't think it was making your experience any better. And you're not going to end that game saying like, oh yeah, I fondly recall that moment in the game that described a character who wasn't us doing things that didn't matter. You know, that's not story, that's atmosphere, that's setting, and if you like that kind of thing, fill your boots. If your idea of good story is phoning up an old friend who lives in a small town and they say, oh, things are getting really exciting around here, next May we're getting a Taco Bell, maybe you'll enjoy the twists and turns that this story throws at you. It's not my bag. So let's find the fun in my father's work, where fun is represented by Luke, I am your father. And not fun is represented by, in the case of this 6-month-old board game, DNA test results prove that you are the father. My father's work is not fun. So I mentioned off the top of this that I did something with my father's work that I haven't done with any other board game in my life. And what was that thing? I stopped playing. And I have never done that with a game. At the very least, I'll see it through to the end, even if I'm not enjoying it. But this game, I mean, we got to the first turn after the second generation gets introduced, second of 3 generations. We all just kind of looked at each other and said, do you want to keep playing this? And the consensus was kind of no. Now, granted, we were going through something at the time. We had rented an Airbnb and the place was a complete dump and we were on the phone all day with customer service trying to get our money back. So it was tainted. It was a tainted play. So we're not going to hold it against my father's work for that. However, once we got out of that hellish Airbnb, we went over to our friends' houses. We said, what are we going to play? Well, I mean, we might as well open my father's work again and you know, give the old college try right off the top. Now that we know what we're doing, there's a few rules questions now, we can give it another go. And we stopped playing again. And we stopped playing, interestingly, at the exact same point. Generation 2, first, maybe second turn into it. The game was just, not only was it not interesting, it was just not good. And I've played not good games before, and I can stick with them, but there was just something so off-puttingly unplayable about this game that I couldn't rouse everybody to finish it with me. And I kind of, if I was honest, I didn't want to finish playing it either. And you say, well, Ryan, how fair is it for you to do a review of a game that you didn't even finish? Well, I think it's absolutely legitimate, as a matter of fact. I mean, with the number of board games out there, and especially the number of great, fantastic board games out there, why would other games that aren't great or fantastic out of the gate even get a shot at taking our precious time, our precious leisure time from us? Why wouldn't we want to spend that time on the most exciting stuff that we can do with it? But to give it a fair shake, I sat down and did a 2-player game with somebody. The last 2 that we aborted were both 4-player games. So I thought, okay, maybe different player count. We played the game and we stopped playing. Can you guess where we stopped playing? That's right, Generation 2, turn 1, maybe turn 2. By then, my friend who hadn't experienced the game before said like, yeah, I kind of get it. Yeah, it's kind of broken. Yeah, it's not very good. It's a simple game with a lot of unnecessary trappings. Some unintuitive rule stuff. The app is just bad. He thought the app was just bad, which it is. And we just packed it up and put it away. I mean, 0 for 3, that's not a great record. And then once more I hear you say, oh, but you didn't finish it. Man, you gotta finish it. You gotta get all the way through the game. So, all right, fine. I've played this game now 4 times. DNF, DNF, DNF. And finally, we finished a game with 4 players. And the 4 players, or was it 3 players? Anyway, the players that I had playing with me by the end of the experience were angry at me. They were mad that I'd asked them to play this game, knowing how bad it was, and they played it, and they agreed. It's not an enjoyable game by any means. So what's really curious about this is if you go to Board Game Geek, and I know the reviews aren't everything. That score, that number score that you see, you should not live and die by that number score. And this is a great example why. My father's work was a Kickstarter project. It cost a lot of money. You pay a bunch of bucks up front, you pay a bunch of bucks in shipping, especially if you're me and you live in Canada. It gets delivered to your house, you crack it open, you're excited, you go to play it. You can't play it because the app isn't ready, and even before the app was ready and the game was ready to ship out, they said, well, we're gonna wait till the app is ready and then we're gonna ship the game out. And everybody said, no, send us the game now so we can touch all the nice components. So begrudgingly, they sent the game out, we touched all the nice components, and we said, great, where's the app? It's unplayable without it. And we waited and we waited and we waited, finally they released the app. So you sit down, you play through it, and yeah, I mean, come on, it cannot be the best game that you've ever played in your life. And if it is, gently I'll say that you haven't played enough games. But really, what's nagging in the back of your brain is how much money you paid for it. And so the sunk cost fallacy sets in, which tells you that because I paid so much money for the game, it must be good, right? There must be something I'm missing. Or I must be required to sort of like overlook the shortcomings of the app. Or I just have to, like, I can't be an idiot. I can't be the idiot for spending the money on this game. Something else has to be at play here. It can't be me. So, since I'm not an idiot for spending the money on the game then must be good. So I spent money on a good game that I didn't enjoy. And the lack of enjoyment means that I just have to play it more, or I have to play a different scenario or something. I don't know, the mental backflips you have to do in order to justify this purchase. And then the really bizarre thing is that the reviews from people who got the game and pulled it out and played it, and some people played it, multiple times and made it all through the end, they would say things like, similar to what I'm saying, the app is buggy, the story's not very interesting, it's really swingy, or it's like really simple and I expect it to be a bit more of a complex game. They'd have all these similar complaints, and then they get down to the bottom of the list, they'd be like, fantastic, 10 out of 10. I was like, what? Wait, hold on. 10 out of 10? Wouldn't you knock a couple points off for those six transgressions you mentioned on your list? Well, no. You see, it has to be a 10 out of 10 because you paid the money for it. Expensive games do not get a 7 out of 10, a 5 out of 10. No. So I usually don't like to review new games on this platform, on the Find the Fun series. I usually stick to older games. You can find them in stores. Everybody's opined on them this way and that, and you can use my video to help make your mind up about it. The reason I'm jumping into this one is because I think it points to a larger trend and sort of a trap for board game enthusiasts. And a lot of people who back a lot of Kickstarter campaigns, I think, have fallen into this trap. I know I have numerous times. And I think I'm finally at the point where that caveat emptor, that buyer beware fear it runs deep through my veins at this point. Too many of these projects are really simple games with really churched up components. And I go back to the example of Splendor. Splendor thematically, I mean, the theme is just completely tacked on, but it's about gem cutters. And I could see a situation where you could set up a game of Splendor and you could use real precious gems in your game of Splendor. So instead of diamond tiles, there's all actual diamonds. The gameplay would remain the same, and it would be a really, really phenomenally expensive version of Splendor. But would it make the game any better playing with the real gemstones? My point is that there's a law of diminishing returns on this component quality thing. Foundations of Rome is another great example. This is, now I haven't played it, but this is what appears to be a fairly simple tile laying game that takes place in a city. But in order to sell it on Kickstarter, they come out and they make every single tile is this big, individually modeled building, so you get this cool, impressive looking cityscape on your board. And that's neat. But I was interested in how it played, so I went to two different conventions, and I asked people sitting there playing the game, like, how do you like Foundations of Rome? And I would get this face, the happy face with the straight mouth, and be like, yeah, it's fine, yeah, it's okay. And I'd say, well, there are interesting decisions to make. Is there struggle and strife? Is there tension? Are you having fun? And they say, yes, well, yes, it is quite fun. Yes, I'm enjoying myself quite a bit, actually, thank you. And I could just see in their eyes the pain. I could see the pain and the suffering and the memory of how much money they paid for this game. And how, if they turned to me and said, well, no, it's actually quite crap, then that would be a tacit admission that they spent a lot of their money on crap, and they don't want to be associated with crap. So they will not admit that that happened. And maybe you're watching this video because you're a customer, you bought a copy of this game, and you thought, oh, I wonder what old Rai Rai has to say about it. And as you're seeing me criticize different features of the game, maybe you're sitting there getting angrier and angrier because you're having trouble separating the purchase from you. You're having trouble separating that decision from your identity. Your identity is that purchase decision. You are my father's work. You support this on Kickstarter. You know what I'm saying? So then when I say, well, it's actually kind of crap, what you're hearing is, well, you're actually kind of crap. I think like me, you went to a campaign page, made a lot of great selling points, components looked beautiful, you love the theme, you love this idea of generations carrying work through, different rounds of the game. You love that game trays was involved. All these elements added up to what you thought would be a really great experience that you could have fun with your friends. For my part, it fell far short of expectations, and that's okay. Because God didn't make no junk. But Renegade Games did. People, I implore you, stop spending exorbitant amounts of money on games with trumped up components. It's madness.
Did you just watch that whole thing? Oh, hey, to 100% this video, click the badge to subscribe, and then click the bell to get notifications when I've got new stuff.